So you found the perfect home. But high mortgage rates have you second guessing. The Churchill Mortgage Team says waiting to buy can be a costly mistake. Try their free 15-minute analysis to see the difference between buying now versus waiting for lower rates. Visit churchillmortgage.com to learn a smarter way to build wealth through home ownership. This is a paid advertisement. NMLS ID 1591. NMLSconsumeraccess.org. Equal housing lender. 1749 Mallory Lane, Suite 100, Brentwood, Tennessee 37027.
The South Dakota Stories, Volume 4. I remember wondering why I'd ever visit South Dakota in the winter. But then again, why hadn't I? There was so much wilderness to explore, so many ways to restore my soul, and so many landscapes that put a smile on my chilly face. So why would I visit South Dakota in the winter? 'Cause this is where winter was meant to be. There's so much South Dakota, so little time.
Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm GiGi. It's Sunday. I didn't do one yesterday, I promised, but my uncle passed away, the one I told you about a while back that had liver cancer. So just been dealing with that. And so thank you for all your kind messages on social media. He was definitely what we called our funkle, the fun uncle, always laughing, always having a good time, never left his presence without being in a good mood. And, you know, in our family, we've been raised very close to our aunts and uncles. So they're like bonus parents. And so it's a tough loss. And we just had one in May. So just, I hope everybody stays well for a while. It's kind of piling up at this point. And it's really hard to see my dad go through this. They were super close their whole life, best friends. And in fact, my dad got there yesterday and came in and kissed him on his forehead. And about 3 minutes later, he passed. So I think he was waiting on my dad. We're going to go spend some time over there today with family. But I wanted to get this in because I'm better when I'm busy. That's just how I roll. First off, big thank you to Stephen, Sylvia, April, Margaret, Bama Sunshine, and Lori for the donations. Really appreciate you. And our music fact of the day. So the band Toto, who I think has a ton of amazing, amazing hits. One of their most popular is Africa. This is really cool. I didn't know this. It's constantly playing in a secret desert location. There was an African artist named Max Seidentoft. I think I got that wrong, but he created a sound installation that includes solar panels to play Africa by Toto endlessly. So anyways, all right. Before we get started with this Netflix Sins of Our Mother episode 1, I want to make super clear all of these pictures in this slideshow to the left of where I am came from the Netflix documentary. I'm giving them credit for it. Don't want to get sued. So this episode 1, I haven't watched the rest of the series yet. I've only finished episode 1. But first off, can we just talk about the fact that there is zero mention of Stacey Cox, which is Melanie's mom and Lori's sister who died at a young age? Zero. She's not included in the family tree. She doesn't even come out of the mouth of her mother. I thought that was just shocking to me, honestly. Also, no mention of the infant that she had that died. None. And that just blew me away. So let's get into this. And I know a lot of our listeners actually don't have Netflix. So the other thing, as far as the slideshow goes, I don't think I can put this up on the drive. So if you do want to see the slideshow, you'll have to hop over to the YouTube channel. So this series opens up. The title of this, by the way, is The 144,000. And it opens up with the body cam footage of Charles meeting officers at his house that night, saying he can't get in touch with his kids. And then he tells them, you know, she threatened to murder me. It shows them kicking the door down. So then Colby comes in. He says, the cops knock at my door. Are JJ and Tylee there? He says, Tylee, my sister. So he calls Lori and she says, I don't know what to tell you right now. I'm going to take care of it all. I love you. Bye. He called one more time and her phone's dead. And then she sent that email. If you go back through the mega series, by the way, if you're listening to this because of the Netflix series, I've done a mega series on this case from day one. There's over 50 episodes that tell kind of the whole story in a timeline. It's a really good resource, I think, if you want to learn more about this case. She sent that email where she says, I can't tell you where we are, but know that we're safe. So then they play the jail call. It says, Colby says, I love you. That's why this is the hardest conversation I could ever have with anybody in my whole life. I would never have thought you would have done something like this. And Lori says, what is it that you think I've done? So Colby says that belief will take you to a different place if you think you have to do these things. And he says, my mom, because she's so deep in her belief, I think it just makes her harder to reach. And he says that she's still in fantasy land. Then we go over to Janice's house, and this is the first time she's spoken since the bodies were found. Also, her husband and Lori's dad, Barry, is on this, and I haven't seen him speak before this at all. I know he was asked to do some interviews for a book, and he asked for 6 figures. So I don't know what Netflix paid him, if they paid him, but anyways. So Colby says my grandma is very defensive of her family. And they're showing Colby at his grandma's sitting down with a box of photos and things that have to do with Lori. And he said he was mad at his grandma for defending his mom, but he also realizes that she's very defensive of the people that she loves. And Janice says that they're saving all of their pictures with Lori, but they don't really enjoy looking at them right now and that it's hard. So I think her and Summer both were very, very defensive of Lori before the kids' bodies were found, often laughing in interviews when it would be, said, was she brainwashed or would she hurt her kids? And so I totally acknowledge right now that things are very different as far as what she knows now. And Colby says, for me, it's like, I don't even know if I really care about having that stuff, meaning the pictures. He says, I can't erase her out, but at the same time, I don't know at what point I'll want to have that memory of her. And Janice says you will someday, and I don't mind holding on to it until then. So Colby says, I can't right now. I'm still so angry. He says, I can't put in perspective. I have to think about Lori like she was, I'm sorry, this is Janice. I can't put it in perspective. I have to think about Lori like she was and not think about her now. I have it very divided in my head to function. And she said, looking back, everything seemed normal. We had 2 boys, Adam and Alex. Adam is just a doll. He loves his family. And she says, Alex was just super funny. He wanted to be a stand-up comedian. Lori was our next child. She was a darling little girl. Then she says, I raised all of our kids in the LDS church, and all our kids loved the Book of Mormon, and she always loved scripture. So in comes dad, Barry. He says she was like 8, and I was trying to teach her some things, and she started crying when she got home and told her mom and siblings, Dad is a spiritual giant. And he said she was very sensitive to that. He said, I know Lori is loved by her heavenly Father as well as other people who have been influenced and taken captive by Satan. Colby said that his mom got married right out of high school and it didn't last. And then she gave birth to Colby when she was 22. And he says that his biological dad and his mom were in a bad relationship, and Lori didn't want him to be in that. So she removed him from that situation. And then we see Joe Ryan's sister Annie come on, and she says that their relationship with Lori and Joe Ryan happened really fast. So Colby said they got married, they all moved in together, and he was really sweet and outgoing. And he thought it felt good to be a family because his whole life, that's what he wanted. And he said that's what his mom wanted. And Annie said Lori became the perfect sister. She was delighted that they were having a little girl, and they picked out the name Tylee, which Annie thought was beautiful. It is a really pretty name, by the way. Janice said Lori was super excited to have Tylee. She was tiny, a darling little baby, blue eyes, and said she was under 5 pounds when she was born, and Colby adored her, and she was everything to him. So Colby says he was excited to have a sister, and all he wanted was to have a family. But Annie said not long after Lori had Tylee, she entered the Miss Texas pageant, as we all know. And being on stage and being recognized to Lori was very important. So they go on to the Wheel of Fortune thing. And Annie said, I always think she had this inclination to spiritualize everything because she said God had told her she was going on Wheel of Fortune. And she had to have that validation that she had heard it from God, is what Annie said. Colby said he remembered Joe being this really sweet person in the beginning. And then he said, I don't know if he was just annoyed by me as a kid. Little things such as Colby smacking his lips while he was eating. He didn't have manners. And Colby said it was always discipline, but never being taught how to correct these behaviors. Colby said it got worse and worse, and he would punch me in the back of the head. And he said he was a scared kid looking at his mom to save him from Joe Ryan. And Annie said she was worried and asked if she had ever experienced abuse, meaning Lori, and she said she did with Joe. And Annie said she wanted her to leave him. Colby said one day, I'll never forget, they had this long driveway where they were living. And they take off down the driveway to leave. And he said it felt like freedom. And he never wanted to see Joe Ryan again. He goes into the sexual abuse allegations. And he said he remembers telling his mom around the age of 8. And he didn't know how to explain what had happened. But he said he told her how he was using him and what he was doing. Lori was silent, and Colby felt like he had ruined her life, and that's where it started. That was kind of the breaking point for Lori, according to Colby. So they play that video of her testimony that we've talked about in the past where, I told the bishop if I didn't get a tip, I'll recommend, all this. She said, I wanted to murder Joe. And Colby said that Lori would say in front of them or in front of other people that she wanted Joe Ryan dead. So Colby also talks about Alex tasing Joe and said he probably wanted to put him in the back of the trunk. Now, that surprised me because that is something that kind of makes me think, did he know about this plan with Joe? But he stops and says, so he kind of stops in the middle of that, and he just says that Alex was the oddball. So in 2006, after she separated from Joe, Colby said they were all over the place, different houses, different schools, different everything. And then Lori met Charles, and they were introduced by a client of hers at the salon. And Janice says that Charles was charming and Southern and so fit, and it was cute to see them together. She thought they were well matched, and we know that Charles converted to LDS when he got with Lori. And it's just that backtracking with Janice because we know that entire side of the family, other than Adam, shunned Charles and did nothing to help him with what he was saying Lori was doing, which is going off the rails. We've always said she was never held accountable by her family for anything. And I think that kind of contributes to where she ended up in a bit. It's a lot of things combined. But Colby said Lori married Charles because she loved him, but also, and I think this is the big also, he was financially secure. And he could take care of them financially and had shown that he wanted to. But Colby felt like that Charles genuinely wanted to take care of him and Tylee. And so we know Charles had sons of his own, and Colby said they became a unit. And they felt more settled. They adopted JJ, as we know, in 2013. And Colby asked his mom, you really want to have a baby? And he said he thought they were out of their minds. He knew that that JJ had autism and would struggle with some things throughout his life. But he said JJ was the one who made everyone else feel like they needed to be themselves. He said he loved him so much, and they had a very deep relationship. And that also JJ loved Tylee so much and really would listen to what she would say. I think that's super cute. Their bond till the end, literally. Tylee formed this natural, nurturing relationship with JJ, from the beginning. And as time went on, the LDS church, according to Colby, became a bigger topic in their house. There were pictures everywhere, and pictures of family and other things were getting replaced by pictures of temples and LDS stuff. So then they play some audio of Lori. I haven't heard some of this stuff. I'm thinking maybe somehow Netflix has got copies of these podcasts that we cannot find online. But it says, this is Lori, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a gateway to get you to the temple so that the Lord can teach you himself. I was in the ceiling room one time and saw a spirit sister come over, and she kissed me on the cheek before she disappeared through the wall. And I'll tell you, I've had people talk to me. All of a sudden, I hear this voice super loud, and I look around, and I'm like, anybody hear that? No? Okay. And he sent me on a mission. So he told my husband and I to move to Kauai. And then she says, Hawaii, Hawaii, Hawaii. We were there 3 years. I thought we were going to be there forever. Look, she's cherry picking what Jesus says, because I don't think Jesus has ever told me move to Hawaii ever in my life. If he did, I might listen. So December 2014, we're still talking about, this is still Lori. She said, I loved those children. We had so much fun doing that. And it shows them kind of swimming in the ocean, just their life in Hawaii. She said her life is full circle. I had to marry this husband to adopt this child to get to the point to be in Kauai at the time. I loved it there. And Colby said it was paradise and payoff for all the stuff that had ever happened in the past. I don't think it's payoff. Some people don't get payoff when they've had very traumatic things happen. They don't get to move to Hawaii. Tylee's friend, I think her name is Vaisha. It's such a beautiful name, and she's such a cute girl. She was on there, and she went to Hawaii 3 or 4 times. We know Lori would fly her out there to visit Tylee, and she would stay for a while. And she said they were very cared for when she was there. And there were times she wanted to live at Tylee's house because she was so comfortable there. Then we switch over to April Raymond. That's her friend she met in Kauai at church. Lori invited her to lunch, and then they just developed their friendship from there. And April was a single mom, and there's a stigma attached to being a single mom, especially being LDS. So she kind of felt like Lori was an answer to her prayers because Lori had a very similar background of being a single mom. And she thought Lori and Charles had a very ideal marriage, but she complained a lot about Charles. And she didn't see him as a spiritual equal. And that was a big source of contention in their marriage, according to April. She thought Charles was always trying to catch up to Lori as far as being spiritual and understanding different concepts. And maybe he just didn't really understand them. But she also said she didn't think Charles understood how frustrated Lori was about this inequality in a spiritual sense that she felt. And ultimately, she felt Charles was holding her back. Her beliefs had become a lot more extreme. She told April she had a personal encounter with the angel Moroni, and he was someone she communicated with regularly. So we go back into Lori talking, and it says, I've been ministered to by the angel Moroni. I've seen him. I've had lots of angelic ministry. I no longer need to sleep very much because I'm woken up constantly by angels giving me instructions on things I can do to help further the Father's work. The time is now. The Lord is gathering his people. So if you remember at the hearing last week, Archibald said, we will eventually, the public will learn about her mental health diagnosis. He said the court knew, the prosecution knew, he knew. I really do think they're going to pull some of these podcast things in and hearing voices. I think that's going to be the route they go. I think it's going to be something. They have stuff to work with. Look, I've always said, you know what you did was wrong when you go into a police station after your husband has been murdered by your brother and you give a full rehearsed story about self-defense. If she were truly incompetent when these murders happened or truly criminally insane, she would have said, "Hey, I killed Charles," or "I didn't kill Charles. He was a demon. I killed Ned Schneider." Or at the welfare check, she wouldn't have given an elaborate story about JJ being in Arizona with Melanie Gibbs. She would have said he turned into a demon 3 days ago and I killed him. So for me, it's at the time, it doesn't matter. You can have mental illness, but you can still be culpable. And I 100% believe she's culpable because she lied. She covered it up. You only cover it up when you know what you did was illegal and wrong. April said she thought the beliefs gave Lori some identity, but really would have never imagined it would have taken us to where we are today. So Lori told April that they were going to move back to Arizona, and it cuts to a clip of Colby, Lori, Tylee, and JJ in the car, and it's a video. And Colby says, "So we got till Tuesday night until the whole squad goes back home." And Lori says, "Boo-hoo, mama gonna cry." Colby says everyone has their own thing going on, but, and Lori interrupts and says, "They're busy lives. You're men now." And Colby says, "Yeah, I got things going on. Girls." Lori says, "Yeah, girls, you got to get back to your girls." And Colby says, "Play basketball." Lori says, "You got to get back to your sports and your girls and your classes." Colby says, "I think that's the best one we had," meaning a video. So apparently they did these. I think maybe after all this went mainstream, he might have pulled some of these offline or all. I haven't been able to find them. So Lori says, "Merry Christmas," and Lori says, "Out," and gives the hang loose signal. And what's interesting to me is you have JJ in the back seat and he kind of is smiling at the camera and he's super cute. And then you have Tylee who is up in her seat, kind of almost at the gap in between the back seat and that gap between the passenger and the driver's seat. She's not acknowledged at all. Zero. They don't even bring her into the conversation. At one point, she says something about college.
Come unwrap some holiday magic this season in Denver, where the lights are brighter and the shopping is grander. The shows are more spectacular, the trees taller, the festivities merrier. So come for your holiday traditions or make some new ones with your friends and family in the Mile High City, where the season feels a whole lot more wonderful. Discover great hotels and more things to do at milehighholidays.com.
And she's just not acknowledged. And that kind of stood out to me. So Colby says they moved back to Chandler and find this house. And he was at school. And the reason he moved back to Chandler again and stayed was because of him and Kelsey, his wife, who, as we know, a week and a half ago, he was arrested for admittingly sexually assaulting her and was let go. And the charges dropped for now. He says the first time he saw Kelsey was in their school gym. He said she was an emo girl with this blonde hair over her one eye. So Kelsey comes on and said Colby was friends with her brother. And technically she first met Colby in middle school. And finally he asked her out when they were both in college. So Colby went to a Christian church with Kelsey, and Lori was really mad about that. And Kelsey said Lori felt like she was taking Colby away from the LDS church, and she thought it was more about control than anything. And she said that Lori was really passive aggressive and that she would snake her way into things and manipulate things or make Colby feel bad. And she said Lori was always competing with her for Colby's love and attention. And Kelsey said she always had a very off feeling about Lori. And I think that makes a lot of sense. In the past, we've heard Colby say that Lori treated him more like a boyfriend than a son. And so you can see that whole mom monster-in-law when this marriage happened. I think it would be very easy to see Lori that way. So after they got engaged, Lori was acting really bizarre and would say off the wall things like, "Jesus loves you, but he loves me most." But Colby and Kelsey got married, and she said the wedding was weird. She said they did pictures with her family, but when it came time to do pictures with Colby's family, Tylee was not there. Now, this has been something that's been talked about for a while. And they asked where Tylee is, and Lori said she was on a ski trip. So Colby says to this day, it breaks his heart that they don't have a family picture from his wedding with Tylee. And we've always wondered what happened with that. And now we know that apparently it was that she was on a ski trip. So Colby thinks that Lori had an issue with Kelsey being the woman in his life at that point. And he said from that point on, everything became a problem. And Annie Cushing said there was a shift with Lori after Colby's wedding. And she said it was sad and a transition in how she talked about her religion, which was more focused on end times. And that Lori seemed genuinely frightened about it and said it's going to be scary. And we've heard this many times before where Lori says, sometimes I think it would be better to put the kids in a car and go off the side of the cliff and then to live through the end times. And Annie's like, no, let's not do that. Colby said at this point, too, she started stockpiling rice, beans, powdered milk, tents. And Colby said it was like, you're going to have to survive some kind of Walking Dead scenario at some point. So we get back to Lori's voice. And she says, we're gathered together as saints and as brothers and sisters preparing for the second coming of Christ. We want to be there together and we want to be there stronger together. So Janice says when they come back from Hawaii, Alex and Lori started listening to these podcasts together. And Alex would send these podcasts to Janice and tell her, you have to hear this, Mom. We also know that he had sent several people these podcasts and he would say, you have to hear this. Colby noticed that Alex was coming around a lot more often, and Lori actually seemed a lot happier when he was there. Back to April Raymond, she was trying to understand this new belief system Lori had, and she started telling her about the podcast group. It seems like her and Alex both were trying to bring anybody in to this podcast, alternate reality, religion, whatever wackadoodle stuff it is. But then April mentions Melanie Gibb, and then we have a voiceover. We are here with Lori and Melanie this morning on our podcast, Feel the Fire. We hope all can feel the fire, and thank you so much. Lori says we want everybody to feel the fire, the heavenly fire that you can be encompassed in his love. And Melanie said, that's right. Lori was wanting to feel some loin fire. Colby says him and Tylee talked a lot of times about all this stuff that Lori was getting into, talking about how it felt off to them. It felt weird. The way Lori would act and the way that Lori and Gibb would get a conversation going and then kind of slip away from everybody and start talking. So Janice says she started having a group of friends and they thought she's just being kind to some, she calls them off ducks. See, but it's not even a thought from Janice that she sees Lori as being a saint, taking these oddballs in, and doesn't even say at this point where we are in 2022 that she was joining this fringe group. It's still, she doesn't acknowledge that even. April says that Lori told her she met Zulema at church, and Colby said he was excited for Lori because she really hadn't had friends in a long time, and even told her one time that he was proud of her and to go have fun and find friends. He said, I didn't know there was a group she was leading or anything, but he does remember her starting to go to these Preparing a People conferences. And so a clip comes in of a conference and a lady is announcing with Chad Daybell, one of our main speakers. So Chad, they show video and he says, I'm just very honored to be part of the conference. I've recently released my autobiography entitled Living on the Edge of Heaven, where I tell more about my 2 near-death experiences and how that prompted me to write my novels. Janice said it was called Preparing a People, and it was just a meeting. Lori wanted the family to go. And to me, kind of the impression I got is that maybe Janice did go to one. She didn't say she didn't go. And she said Chad gave a talk at it. So we cut back to Chad talking at the conference. He said, I've been waiting 20 years for something to happen. I write all these novels and people are like, when's it going to start, And here's one of my new favorite characters because this is how people think I act. And he talks about Woody Harrelson in the movie 2012. And he said, that's how my relatives honestly think that's how I've acted for 5 years. And he kind of laughs. But he was right. We can prepare ourselves to survive through these trials that are coming. And that's the whole reason you're here. I know the Spirit has guided you and prompted you that you have a role to play. So we hear Melanie Gibbs' voice, I believe. And she says afterwards, Lori went to where he was selling his books, and that's where they met. She talked to him, asked a lot of questions. She was interested in his thoughts. He was interested in what she knew, and the connection was instant. And Lori and Chad are like a tornado. It's like you have to have the right ingredients at the right time to merge, and then you get this really destructive path. And I think that's kind of, instead of fire and gasoline, the way I'm going to refer to Lori and Chad now is tornado, because they destroyed everything in their path. He had told her at this first meeting they had been married multiple times, but not in this life. So they show messages of loin fire on the screen, the first 3 or 4 sentences. And Dr. John from Hidden True Crime is on there. It was great to see him. He says you have to go back to 1985 to understand Chad. So in comes Benjamin Hyde, who was on the mission with Chad in New Jersey. He said Chad was super successful in getting people baptized in the church because he was really easy to approach, and he had that quiet and gentle side about him. So when he gets back from the mission, Chad went cliff diving, as we know, and he said he could look beyond the veil and bring back visions of the future. And he thinks that gave him the power of being a prophet. That's what Dr. John was explaining. Benjamin said Tammy was definitely more lively than Chad, but they kind of balanced each other out. So Dr. John points out a really good thing, which is Chad marries the first woman he's dated, essentially. And there seemed to be a number of followers to his thinking in Rexburg. And I've heard that often in the past, that Rexburg did have a sizable group of people that bought into Chad's stuff. So they show interviews with Chad, and he tells a man he felt he should start his own publishing company. And here comes Julie Rowe, who harasses these people through text messages and dragons and everything else. She says, not only is she a woman who has prophetic gifts, she said she's public about it, which is shunned in the LDS church. She said, the truth is most of us on the planet have past lives. There are some people that this is their first life as a mortal being, but most of us have had at least one of their life. And she said she's had several. She does believe we are in the final days before Christ comes. And Chad published the first 5 books that she wrote. So after he published that first book, she met Chad and Tammy. And it seems like she really got close to the family, all the family. She said Chad was dorky. He had a haircut, dad jeans. We've seen that. Cheap tennis shoes and cheap plaid shirts. She said he had spiritual gifts, and the people they met, he would say he could label these people with a number system on how many past lives they had had. She said Chad was really trying to box people in, but it's not a ranking system. And she said the Lord doesn't rank people. That's where Chad got it wrong. She said, and it's like the angel and the devil on your shoulder. And then the more spiritual gifts you get, you're aware or open to, the trickier Satan gets. So Dr. John just says that Chad thought there would be this big apocalypse and the righteous would survive. There were 144,000 chosen ones who would be saved, and they would ride out the storm until New Jerusalem was established to carry on God's mission forever. So Chad's voice comes in, and he says, when my family decided to move from Springville to Rexburg, people thought we were crazy. Someday after the earthquake happens in Rexburg, Little Rexburg will become the headquarters of the church temporarily. The Lord will protect us and have shields over the camp, literal invisibility. Can I just say he got that from Harry Potter? Because in the final scene in the Battle of Hogwarts, all the witches and wizards put the shield over Hogwarts. Eventually, the bad guys tear it down. And then, but a couple of times there's shields put over things. See, he was obsessed with Potter. He was a Potterhead. Chad thought that place was Rexburg. Dr. John said it's supposed to be Christ who comes in to lead, but Chad was convinced it was him. And Dr. John made an amazing point. Chad thought of his books as actual scripture. I mean, and that is really, really true. And that he essentially wanted to piggyback a new religion on Mormonism. So when Lori starts reading these books, she takes them as literal, not fiction, almost like scripture. April said Lori never gave any hints it was more than professional the first time she mentioned Chad to her. And Janice said Lori and Chad were not on her radar as far as being a couple, but she did acknowledge after she met Chad, she changed. So we have a voiceover with Lori where she says, "We're here with Chad Daybell on our Feeling the Fire podcast." And she says, "Chad, hi." You can tell he's remote on the phone, phoning in. He says, "Hello, glad to be on the podcast with you. Why don't you start your first experience with Jesus?" So Lori says, "Why don't you start your first experience with Jesus? You were like his friend and you were like talking with him." Oh boy. And Chad says, "Yeah, what he did was show me some scenes of future events, and there were major tribulations in the world. Much of the world was in chaos, but he was organizing his people to build his new Jerusalem." Y'all, Chad thinks he had actual conversations with Jesus. Oh boy. April said Lori told her Charles was already dead and a demon was in him, and that Lori said she was expecting a call any day that Charles was dead. So Colby goes into the separation with Charles and says his mom told him that she found out Charles had been cheating for years. Every time he goes to California, he had been secretly spending money on these women. And Colby said he called Charles and he was freaking out, saying she's out of her mind and this isn't your mom. And Colby said he was like, "You sound more crazy than you're saying she is." And at the time, he looked like a guilty person freaking out because they'd been caught. So Colby says he just stopped talking to Charles. And you see, after everything Charles did for Colby, which was essentially keep the kid up for a very long time, even as a grown man, Colby just drops him and doesn't even acknowledge. But here's the thing. A few scenes prior, Colby says that him and Tylee would have conversations about, isn't this weird? Isn't this odd? So having that base knowledge of seeing that things are odd with your mom, and then does it not click that maybe Charles knows a little bit more than you do? Because at this point, Colby's not living with Charles and Lori. Zach Cox is, but Colby's not. I just think the way that he dropped Charles was so sad. They all did. And Janice can sit and say he was charming and Southern, but none of them even gave him a second to listen to what he had to say. Colby says he emails the whole family saying she's crazy. And Colby thought that was annoying. And he thought this was between the two of them. And Charles needed to quit bringing the whole family into the drama. And they show a little teeny tiny snippet of an email. And it's the one where Charles says she calls her own daughter. I believe it's a dark spirit. I don't know off the top of my head. But Janice said Charles was saying Lori thought she was a superior being and she knew things they didn't. But that's what everybody says when you're trying to say you're crazy. You know, you think you're God. She said, "I didn't buy Charles' story." I don't know many people who thought they were God or said they were God when they were, yeah. So they play Adam's interview over the phone where he's talking to police. They go through the January 30th stuff with Charles. As we know, that is the kind of the start of all of this. And they take his truck, get rid of his clothes. Janice says, Charles calls her saying you want his stuff back. And he was so upset. So they show the body cam at the house where the cops say Lori did nothing wrong by taking the kids. And Charles is telling his side of her being a resurrected being, emptied the bank account. The cop says, well, what makes her a danger to herself or others? And Charles says, she threatened to kill me. And not only that, but you go back to what we've covered in the mega series, which is none of these cops took him seriously. And maybe if you had a different cop who listened to that exact same story, he would say, hey, yeah, we need to find these kids, because even if she had a legal right to those kids, which is what the cop said, you can have a legal right to your kids and still say things that make you a danger to where the cops need to intervene to make sure they're safe. So Charles's voice comes in and it said, I went to the CSI to file a report where Community Bridges is. And filed a report. They ordered pickup. So then they switch over to the hotel body cam footage after he took her purse. And it shows police footage when Lori, Tylee, and Melanie Gibb went to the police station. And Annie had a really good point. Joe Ryan's, Tylee's aunt and Joe Ryan's sister, he said they were intoxicated by her siren song. And that was her words. And it's true. They totally were giggling and not even taking Charles seriously at all. So when Charles moved to Houston, Colby said Tylee was devastated by the whole situation. The home's broken. She doesn't know how to feel or think. And we know that Tylee and Charles didn't have the best relationship. Step parent, combine that with being a teen. It's a perfect storm sometimes. But I do think that when Lori was married to Charles, that was the only bit of normalcy that poor kid had her whole life. And even if they didn't get along, I'm sure she still loved Charles. And that was obvious to me. One of her friends had actually said that when she went to see her after Charles's murder. Tylee said, we didn't get along, but he was still like a parent figure. So you see that confliction. And I don't think Lori really allowed Tylee to bond with Charles. Lori seemed like she needed to be the main person in every single person's life, whether it's Colby's, Tylee's, Charles's, Joe's, whoever. So July 2nd, 2019, that's when Charles sends Adam the email that Lori faked. And they go through how Charles says he's going to reach out to Tammy, and he had found her email from their book publishing site. And he told Lori in a text he was going to get in touch with her. And Lori says, hey, she's my friend. Don't bother. Then they show the text of Lori saying, stay close to me, and that kind of thing. So July 11th, they show the text from Charles to Adam. Alex is here. And then they play the 911 call. So that's the end of episode 1. Not a whole lot if you've listened to the mega series or followed the case for a very long time that you've learned. But also at the same time, you do get a new perspective from Colby and from Janice. And then we hear from Chad's mission partner, and Dr. John throws in some really, really good points. And you've got Annie who nails Lori, from the very beginning, a lot like Kay, realizes she's off her rocker really early. So it's very interesting. This is So I think in this first episode, going back to the fact that they did not name Stacy at all, just blew my mind. I just can't get over it. It's like she's just not a part of never was a part of their family, even though she died in adulthood with a young child. But as far as we have heard, they didn't come back from Hawaii to make her arrangements. So there you go. Anyways, I have not watched episode 2 or 3. We've got some things family-wise coming on in the next couple of days. Tomorrow, I do plan to watch the Wagner trial, make notes on that. Didn't do an episode on that Friday, mainly because it was all about ballistics and blood spatter. And since the judge ruled that no crime scene photos would be shown, it was all very repetitive and technical as far as just where they found the casings. I will put up a graphic on tomorrow's episode where it shows like Chris Sr. when he was shot. There was a recliner, it seems, right when you came in the door. It looks like he was running around that recliner, maybe to duck behind it, because the shell casings went kind of in a semicircle. But anyway, all right. So I'm going to watch part 2 at some point, and I will throw in an episode about that. But in the meantime, you guys have an amazing rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you soon.
With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Even easier than choosing to keep the Grinch away from the toy drive.
Who's going to deliver the toys to the kids?
What about me, the Grinch?
No.
Yep, even easier than that.
You steal the presents one time.
With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, is it even a decision? That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. Capital One N.A. member FDIC. Copyright Dr. Seuss Enterprises. Copyright Turner Entertainment Company.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.